Good evening. Also tonight, I'm not happy, says the MTR commuters as they want the Railway Corporation to improve its handling of the electricity. Australia Prime Minister Julia Gillard has announced last week that a new detention centre for the asylum seekers will be placed in the town of Northam, approximately 2 hours drive northeast of Perth. Braden Edwards and I have travelled to the remote town earlier this week to discover the opinions from the community and what the President of the Shire has to say.
Making the announcement today, Prime Minister Julia Gillard said a new centre at Northam, north of Perth, will house around 1,500 men, while another at Inverbrackie in the Adelaide Hills will be used for about 400 people. The government also confirmed it will move several hundred asylum seeker children and their families into community-based accommodation. The centre in Northam is expected to cost more than $160 million to build and could be operating by June next year.
I'm here at the Northam Army Barracks, 80 kilometres from Perth, where the federal government is planning to detain up to 1,500 men. The Premier Colin Barnett has already raised concerns about the safety and security of Northern residents, saying there would need to be a lot of investment to prevent the possibility of a riot or escape.
Local residents are unhappy with the plan, believing it is unfair that their community should have to bear the weight of a national problem.
We heard rumours going around that some asylum seekers were going to come here to Northam, but we wouldn't expect to be that close to them. Yeah, I mean, 1,500 men, coming to a small town like this. I mean, all men, anything could happen.
Others believe the centre is evidence of the federal government's poor immigration policies.
Well, I personally believe they should stop these illegal immigrants from entering this country, because there are already hundreds of others that are applying, and they're not getting priority because of this lot.
Shire President Stephen Pollard has acknowledged that the community has concerns about the centre, but said the decision was beyond his control.
We had no decision to make. The federal government own the land that they're intending to build on, and so it's a federal government decision to go ahead with that.
He has also promised to consult the community about the plan.
Look, I'm aware of the opposition. We're holding a public meeting in Northam on the 4th of November. It's a Thursday, 7 p.m. at the Northam Town Hall. I'd like people to come along initially to hear the story rather than come along with preconceived opinions, but they're welcome to bring their opinions with them.
Braden Edwards, DHK News.
The WA Police says they do not intend to charge a Midwest businessman who chased and punched a teenager he caught breaking into cars outside his business. Moit Mazahir has the details.
53-year-old Michael Ross confronted the boy and a friend in Geraldton while they were trying to unlock several cars at about 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning.
Mr. Ross then chased the pair, punched one of the boys to the ground and held on to the teenager until police arrived. The boy complained to police on arrival that he had been assaulted by Mr. Ross. Senior Sergeant Tony Mettam says Mr. Ross did nothing wrong, stating that everybody had the right to defend their property as long as they didn't go overboard. Mr. Ross says he would do exactly the same thing if confronted by criminals on his property. He also says he was faced with the choice of being hit by the boy or defending himself. He urges the public to stop thuggery or hooliganism when they encounter it. Senior Sergeant Mettam says Mr. Ross was perfectly within his rights to make the citizen's arrest and that the public can use proportionate force to defend themselves and hold the offender, but should go no further until police arrive. Moyuk Bazahid, DHK News.
The Health Department has held an emergency meeting before the Industrial Relations Commission to prevent the hospital staff from taking further industrial actions. Richie Lee files this report.
Last week, hospital support staff launched work bans in their fight for better pay and conditions and a guarantee that the government will not privatise their jobs.
The Health Department says the work bans are now having a direct impact on patients and that Sir Charles Gairdner and the Armdale Kelmscott hospitals were now forced to cancel 30 operations today. Workers have been refusing to carry out a number of tasks including emptying bins, moving linens and cleaning dishes. The department called an emergency meeting before the IRC to stop the workers from taking any further industrial action. Staffs are due to return to the IRC on Monday. Richie Lee, DHK News.
Hong Kong has been spared the effects of Typhoon Megi as it weakens and moves away from the territory. The observatory has downgraded the intensity of the storm from severe and all strong wind signals are now cancelled. CL Pro reports.
A rescue operation is underway in Taiwan to free more than 400 people trapped on a highway from landslides triggered by Typhoon Megi. It is thought over 20 people are still missing after more than 20 vehicles become trapped on the Suhua Provincial Highway. The landslides caused a 500-meter-long section of the road to sink by about 20 meters, and 2 of the buses were buried in the landslides. Local media reported that Typhoon Megi was continuing its northward track towards the Taiwan Strait, but its strength was weakening. Hong Kong and southern China are expecting a typhoon next and begin returning fishing vessels to ports and oil terminals. This is thought to be one of the biggest typhoons to threaten the southern China coast in years. On the tropical resort island of Hainan, vulnerable to heavy flooding, as many as 200,000 people have been evacuated from low-lying areas, along with another 150,000 from the southeastern coastal province of Fujian. Typhoon Megi, which killed 19 people in the Philippines, looks set to make landfall east of Hong Kong at the weekend. Sia Pro, DHK News, reporting from Hong Kong.
Angry commuters have criticized the MTR's handling of power failure, which caused traffic chaos on the Tsuen Wan line during this morning's rush hour. At one stage, hundreds of people were queuing for shuttle buses to take them between stations. The MTR has apologized to the affected passengers. The 3-hour disruption occurred after a power cable broke, halting service between Jordan and Yau Ma Tei. The frequency of Jordan to Central trains was reduced to about 4 minutes. Some passengers have complained there are confusions and long waits for the shuttle bus linking Yau Ma Tei and the Tsim Sha Tsui station. The Secretary of Transport and Housing, Eva Cheng, says the government may consider buying the eastern and western harbour tunnels, which are now operated by the private companies. She says the administration would have considered to whether the cost was reasonable. The government already owns the cross-harbour tunnel. Some legislators have said buying 2 tunnels would give the government more control over the toll increase and the traffic flow. The consultant's report on the issue is expected to be published next month. French unions have announced 2 more days of strikes as the government pushes ahead with a bill to raise the retirement age from 60 to 62. Braden Edward reports.
French unions have announced 2 more days of strikes as the government moves forward with a bill to raise the retirement age from 60 to 62. They say that retirement at 60 is a hard-earned right. Weeks of protests have left at least a quarter of the nation's gas stations on empty, blocked hundreds of ships at the Mediterranean port of Marseille, and even forced Lady Gaga to cancel Paris concerts. Police in Leung used water cannons and tear gas to hold back protesters hurling bottles and overturning cars. The French government is trying to remedy growing debt concerns and says the reform is needed to ensure future generations receive any pensions at all. Braden Edwards, DHK News.
A top Canadian military commander, Col Williams, who was in charge of Canada's largest Air Force base and who once flew Queen Elizabeth plane, has been jailed for life without possibility of parole for 25 years. Moit Musahir reports.
Williams, whose obsession with stealing women's underwear escalated into 2 horrific sex murders, was in charge of Canada's largest Air Force base. He pleaded guilty to killing the 2 women in 2 separate attacks. Police said it was likely he would serve his sentence in solitary confinement. In 2005, Williams flew the Queen back to Britain after a visit to Canada, and she was filmed having her photograph taken with him and the rest of the flight crew. In a case that appalled Canada, the court heard how Williams had videotaped himself raping the women, capturing their pleas for mercy, and then filming them as they died. The prosecution described the 47-year-old as one of the worst offenders in Canadian history. The videos, which were not shown in court, will be destroyed when Williams dies. The court heard that Williams had started off by breaking into homes in eastern Ontario and stealing underwear. He sometimes took photos of himself wearing stolen bras and panties. Last November, he entered the house of 38-year-old Marie-France Commute and sexually assaulted her for hours before putting duct tape over her mouth and nose. Commute, a corporal at the Trenton Air Base where Williams was commander, suffocated to death. In January this year, he abducted 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd, drove her to his house, and repeatedly raped her. He strangled her to death with a rope and later dumped the body by a rural road. Williams was finally arrested in February after a police roadside check discovered that the distinctive tyre marks belonging to his SUV matched those outside Lloyd's house. Moyuk Mazahid, DHK News.
In the UK, George Osbornes has delivered his comprehensive spending review with a £7 billion hit on the welfare budget. The cuts including axing of child benefits for higher-rate taxpayers. Isabel Huda has more.
Mr. Osborne also confirmed that there would be an estimated 495,000 job losses in the public sector over the next 4 years. He sought to reassure the public, saying much of it will be achieved through natural turnover by leaving posts unfilled as they become vacant. Estimators suggest a turnover rate of over 8% in the public sector. But yes, there will be some redundancy that is unavoidable when the country has run out of money. The Chancellor said that the department across Whitehall has faced cuts. Many government departments face cuts. Among the biggest losers are the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, which face annual budget cuts of 6%. With policing down 4%, while the Foreign Office will lose 24% over the next 4 years. Overall, the Department for Education will be required to find resources savings of only 1% a year, and the school's budget will rise to £39 billion. Mr. Osborne pledged to maintain universal benefits for pensioners, including free eye tests, prescription charges, bus passes, TV licenses for the over 75s and winter fuel payments. The state pension age to 66 would be brought forward to 2020. Shadow Chancellor Alan Johnson accused the government of taking a reckless gamble with people's livelihood, which could wreck the economic recovery. Isabel Hoofer, DHK News.
US President Barack Obama has aimed his economic message at the female voters as he campaigns on the West Coast for the US Senate election. Richie Lee reports.
President Barack Obama will try to bolster incumbent senators Patty Murray of Washington and Barbara Boxer of California with rallies and fundraisers over the next 2 days, during the trip, his longest campaign swing as president. President Obama gathering with about 30 people in a Seattle backyard before taking a series of friendly questions. Polls have shown an erosion in the slight leads held by the two Democratic candidates to razor-thin margins, with less than 2 weeks left before the November 2nd congressional elections. Obama is seeking to rev up core Democratic voters and is targeting women, who vote Democratic in higher percentages than men. As part of that strategy, Richie Lee, DHK News.
And finally tonight, the annual water buffalo race takes place in Thailand, so let's take a look. And that's all the news from DHK. I'm Marvin Leung. Pleasant viewing and good night.